Let's Talk Global Business, the show in which we look at the economic and business trends connecting the world. I'm Sarah Murray, Managing Director International at the Conference Board, the member-led global think tank that delivers trusted insights for what's ahead. Today, we're diving into the fascinating and sometimes troubling world of AI. Since ChatGPT was launched in November 2022, it feels like advancements in this domain are growing at unparalleled speed, which begs the question, is this growth sustainable? To help us unravel the intricate web that is AI, I have invited two guests to join me today. From the US, we have Brian Evergreen, founder of the Future Solving Company and author of Autonomous Transformation. And from Europe, we have Kromme, international futurist and AI visionary and author of Humanification, Go Digital, Stay Human. My guests are both also senior fellows at the Conference Board. Welcome.
Thank you, Sarah. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, Brian, Christian, let's get down to it. Is the AI bubble about to burst? Brian, do you want to go first?
Happy to. So one of the first thing I'll say is that I tend to try to not suffer fools unless I'm related to them. And I think that unfortunately in the AI world, that's something that we're facing sort of globally and at scale, where there's a lot of misdirection around where AI is useful and not. And I don't think that the entire AI bubble is about to burst, but I think of it a bit like when you see a cluster of bubbles and some of them burst and some of them don't. I think we're going to see a few of the extra bubbles that are based more on hype than actual value burst, and I'm hopeful that they don't take down the real value and potential of AI with them.
Thank you. Christian?
Yeah, I agree with Brian. I think the landscape is complicated and advanced, so it's not one big AI bubble that's about to burst. I see, of course, if you look at the indexes in America, where the big Magnificent Seven are part of, is they're breaking down. So a lot of money has poured into these industries, and the return on investment is not yet there. So I think that we are entering some kind of bubble. It's over leveraged. It's too much invested into it. But I think it will be a short drop. And then we will see a response where we see a return on investment and these technologies start to make a profit for large companies. So yeah, I think probably we are in the beginning of a bubble.
Brian, could you tell us how you see the evolution of AI over the last few years and just give us a sense of where the industry is today?
Absolutely. So, ever since its founding in 1956, right, the AI movement has seen quite a few revolutions where there was quite a bit of excitement, and then when that excitement didn't pan out, it entered into an AI winter and then resurfaced again. And so we found a huge breakthrough with the scale of cloud computing, being able to apply principles that had already been in development and already been thought through in algorithms that had been developed long before. That now that we had the access to so much more data and at scale and the ability to leverage compute in a larger scale than ever before, then suddenly methods were starting to have real application in a way that they truly unprecedented, adding value to a tremendous degree to the organizations who could figure out how to apply it to something valuable for them. And so I'd say in the last few years, to your question, that we've really been seeing more and more organizations leap up in terms of their valuation, in terms of their overall, in terms of the overall output of value from their organizations, and those that were able to effectively harness the artificial intelligence and other advanced technologies. And I think what's been really fascinating is that according to Gartner, there's 27 categories of AI, and generative AI is just one of them. And to me and other insiders of AI who were, I was at Microsoft Research when ChatGPT came out and was actually quite surprised that that's the form of those 27 forms of AI, that generative AI was the one that became the most, suddenly became so viral and popular. But I think a lot of it had to do with suddenly anyone and everyone with no understanding or background of AI could experience it themselves on something they actually care about. Whereas previously, using AI custom vision for quality inspection and being able to find defects, that's very technical and only really matters to people that are in manufacturing, let's say. And so ChatGPT sort of democratized, hey, look at how useful some of this stuff is. And so I think in terms of the evolution, that's the progression that I see and why there's been so much interest and focus where I think that maybe to your earlier question around AI bubble and potential bursting is that maybe the misdirection of, okay, this is where the market wants us to go. So any company and every company is going to suddenly do a hard full pivot to generative AI and actually even shelve other initiatives and other projects that have anything to do with AI that isn't generative AI. And I think that's where I think that was a misguided and maybe the wrong choice in terms of creating value that organizations and enterprises can actually apply to their workloads.
Thank you, Brian. Christian, anything to add?
Well, I look towards AI from a different perspective. I compare AI with biological intelligence. So, if a child is born, it uses its new cortex brain, the AI in the cloud of our body, to recognize basic patterns like shapes, colors, contours of the environment. When it understands that, then it starts to move within that environment, starts to grab stuff, start to crawl and walk. And at a certain level, children become bigger and start to understand more complex patterns like language. First little words, sentences, and then whole narratives. And finally, when they're 18 years old, they move towards more sentient, more agent like intelligence. So they have a basic understanding of the conceptual world, the books and the internet, and the physical world around them. And they are able to combine those two. And I think that's where we are right now with AI. So we see multimodal models, so we see the combination with robotics. So embodied intelligence, where machines can feel and touch the environment and learn from that environment. And I see us at the cusp or the tipping point towards that fourth stage. And I think that stage is the most impactful because when machines or robots and AI algorithms have some kind of agency and they can perform multiple tasks sequentially and come up with more complex answers and research, that's where AI starts to have its biggest impact. And I think that's where we are right now.
Interesting, thank you. Just moving on, if we think about hype versus reality and are the expectations outpacing reality, just talk about breakthroughs versus limitations. What can it do today and what does it still struggle with?
Well, I see AI as the smartest brain in the world, but also as the dumbest brain. And because it can solve very complex problems and deal with very complex issues, but at the same time, it has a lack of common sense. And that's, I think, where AI is really bad at this moment. I think hallucinations has brought back to a couple of percents, which is quite high. So these systems can speak the truth, and reasoning is getting to a reason level. Bias is a problem that I'm really worried about. But the biggest problem is, I think, the lack of any common sense. And that's why these systems can be used for some tasks, but some tasks which look really easy and not useful for that. So I think that's where the limitations are right now.
Interesting. And if you think about data limits, a next generation AI models struggling to access new data? Is the use of synthetic data, a risk to their integrity?
Sure. I think so. There's so much that's been said that I would love to respond to a little bit if that's all right. One thing I would say is that I think that generative AI, so first of all, AI and generative AI are not the same thing. It's important to clarify what's generative AI versus not. And so generative AI is something that it's effectively predicting the next word or the next pixel based on is it generates something new that looks like something that it approximates with what you're looking for. And so, anyone who's done next word typing in their phone, has experienced this even before, these ChatGPT came out. And so, and if for those who aren't familiar with, that are listening that are maybe not familiar with the Chinese room experiment, I think it's a good example of how generative AI itself doesn't actually understand anything, which is one of the reasons that we need to kind of be combining generative AI with other types of AI and other forms of expert systems, because generative AI itself is sort of like the Chinese room experiment is that if I went in a room and I don't speak Chinese, but if there was a grid on the wall and of when you receive this character, put this character, under the door, and someone's sliding characters to me under the door, I'm responding based off of this grid on the wall. And to the person outside, they might be forming a real connection with me. They might be thinking we might be falling in love as far as they're concerned. But I have no idea what we're talking about. I receive a character, I look up at the wall, I grab a character, I push it back out under the door. And so I think that the idea that we have that AI, the generative AI models understand the world, I think is something that I do my best to clarify as often as possible. They have zero understanding. They're doing their best to guess based off next word and approximations and some complex math, but they don't. For instance, if they make a great recipe for a cocktail, and if you ask for a great cocktail with a few ingredients, they're not going to add ketchup, not because they have any understanding of how bad it would be to put ketchup in a whiskey drink, because they don't have taste. They've never tasted anything. There's no real world understanding. It's just there's no correlation of putting ketchup in a whiskey cocktail, and so they're not going to do that. So when we think about things like data, I think it's easy for us to look at and say, okay, what is it that got us to where we are today? Like for instance, the question around next generation models in terms of accessing new data. I think that the idea that we'll continue to add more and more data, and we'll even add synthetic data, and then it will continue to just get better. The thing that I think is really important to think through is, for those who haven't read it, there's this amazing book called Factfulness by Hans Rosling, and it talks about logical fallacies that we face with. And I think this is such a perfect example of what we're seeing in the market, because if I have a 6-year-old son, and if you look at the data of the last 6 years, he is on track to be 18 feet tall by the time he turns, or maybe 30 feet tall. I don't remember the exact math, but obviously way, way taller than any human would ever actually grow to be. But I have data driven evidence that that's exactly what's going to happen. But we as people know, our ration and our logic tells us, well, wait, human growth is an S curve. So even though he's exploding in growth right now, that is going to level out. And it's the same thing that is going to happen in terms of valuing, and already has happened. We've seen the way that bold proclamations have been made to drive up valuations, and then now things have continued to be pushed back, and more releases are slight incremental improvements on what happened, but not breakthroughs the way that the initial breakthrough was, because we've reached that the top part of the S curve. So in terms of data limits, yes, I mean, the idea, even the logical idea that more data will somehow magically make it even better, is flawed. We're nearing a rooftop of how much value we can have from this type of model, and there's new and other and old actually architectures and ideas that I'm hopeful and excited for folks to bring to the fore to achieve actual value with the systems, because of the fact that we're not going to get there by continuing to just pump more and more data into the same type of submodels.
Yeah, I think as well the data limits. Of course, we have put almost the whole internet in these models. But if you look at the internet, about 60-70% is crap. It's worthless information. So it's I think one is increasing the quality of the information that go into these models. And I think that when we reach this limit, which we will reach very soon, I think we need to go to a different kind of data gathering. That's why I think where robotics come in. So with embodied intelligence, if you have a robot with full packed with all kind of sensors, visual sensors, tactile sensors, then the AI starts to have a different kind of understanding of the world around us. So I think that's the next level, how we can feed those AI models. And we already see this, for example, with Tesla, with the humanoid robot and Figure One. So when more and more of these humanoid robots and of course, autonomous cars will hit the road, hit the factories or distribution centers. We have a new source of information and data which we can feed into the AI models, and therefore, I think then we will see an improve in have a better understanding of how the world works in a way that we do, and perhaps more common sense as well.
If we think about the regulatory and ethical barriers, governments and industries are moving towards regulation, especially in Europe. How do you think this will slow down the AI development, Christian?
Well, here in Europe, we have all kinds of the AI Act, the AI EU Act, which is regulating AI on a very drastic way. I think I can't use Apple Intelligence here. I can't use many applications here. So I think there's something good in that, because they prohibit people to train data models, for example, which information which is not AVG proof. So yeah, and therefore it's very hard to create models where privacy and data is not done in the right way. But I think the technology on itself goes so fast that even if it's regulated, it's still way beyond what the most of the people can comprehend and where they get their mind can wrap around it. So yeah, it will slow down innovation. On the one hand, you need to regulate it because you can use it in ways which are not which are wrong, basically. But on the other hand, you want to open the field and yeah, push innovation to the next level. So it's a very difficult topic in my opinion.
Brian, what's your view sitting in the US?
I have a different view than many of my U.S. counterparts, and that is that, and I think that it's a very complicated topic because absolutely there can be a direct correlation between stiff regulation and the pace of innovation, and I think that the free market and different aspects of how the United States has approached innovation and tried to foster that has been a big part of its economic success. And but I will say that there's this company that I'm guessing all of you are familiar with here on this call, and many of our listeners likely as well. UL, Underwriters Laboratories, is an example of a US based company where if you want to sell a technology into that, something, a physical application that plugs into the wall, like a toaster or something, into the US, you have to have it be tested by either their national labs or one of the other labs. Or there's another couple competitors, but and I used to, full disclosure, I used to work for UL. So, but UL was actually founded after the Chicago World Fair, where all eyes were on Edison and Westinghouse and the electricity war versus AC versus DC current and such. And someone said, well, how on earth are we going to underwrite this for fire? And so hence the name Underwriters Laboratories, to figure out, well, electricity starts fire. And before you really dove into that, whole city blocks were burning down. And so I think we're at the same point right now in terms of AI's development, where all eyes are on some of these top competitors. But there's also this question of, well, how on earth are we going to figure out, safety around this? And I think that the same measured approach of saying, rather than trying to get into the weeds of exactly how everything was made, at a minimum, we could test the output and say, is this safe? And if whether or not it's safe is what will determine whether or not it can be released to the market. And that's been UL's approach.
It's always hard to imagine how people are going to use a specific tool. So you can design a tool for a specific purpose and it can be used for completely different kind of purposes. And that's always hard when you launch a product. So you have some idea how the product is going to be used, how the service or product is going to be used, but it can be used in different ways. And that's also true with AI. So yeah, it's a difficult topic, and I think it's better to go slower here than go faster, because well, we go really fast with AI, and I think the accidents can also be really big if we don't do the right things. But as an innovation enthusiast, of course, I hope that Europe will be more willing to open up the market for new leading AI technologies, because if we don't do that, I think it will have an extra negative effect on the economic output of Europe.
I thought it was really interesting about the regulations and ethical barriers, that there is regulation, it is pretty heavy in Europe. Can it keep up? And also, yeah, that correlation that you mentioned, Brian, about regulation and the pace of innovation. We've seen the US have always been a lot faster. How will the European Union kind of manage that? Because I think there is a need for regulation, and as you mentioned, Christian, better to go slower than faster. But it's a difficult balance. It's a difficult balance to manage when things are going so fast. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll continue this discussion on the current state of AI and what leaders should be doing to prepare themselves going forward. Please note that you can find a host of content around the subject of AI on our website.
Join us at the Conference Board's Future Reward Europe, happening on the 5th and 6th of June in Brussels. Explore cutting-edge thinking on pay equity, AI and compensation, employee experience, and more, all through a global lens. Hear from top reward leaders and connect with peers shaping the future of work. Register now at conference-board.org/rewards. Get insights, get inspired, get connected.
Hello and welcome back to this conversation with Brian Evergreen and Christian Kromme. We've been talking about the state of AI. I want to turn the discussion now to look at where we go from here. So, next generation applications, what can we expect in 2025? There's a lot of emergence of AI agents. What are they and why is everyone excited? Brian, do you want to kick this one off?
I'd be happy to. So, and it's perfect timing because my new book, Agentic Artificial Intelligence, with Pascal Bornet and Jochen Wirtz and Tom Davenport and several other co-authors, actually launched today. So this is something that's very top of mind for me. And so,
Congratulations.
oh, thank you. And so, AI agents are unlike ChatGPT, for example, which is a source of information, but it can't act. And so the true definition of an AI agent is something that you can give it something to you want it to go do, and it can actually research and reason, it can make a decision, and then it can take an action on your behalf without any intervention from you. That's probably the most boiled down definition that I would have of AI agents.
Can you give me an example? Let's say there's a sales team within an organization. What could an AI agent do to help them?
So for a sales, that's a great question and a good example. So a sales team, if they wanted to use an AI agent, what I would first say is look at all of the work that you as a sales team do on a given day and all that you leave undone on a given day, and to sort of categorize that and break down that work into buckets of things that could be, based on the level of complexity and thought. Similar to the way that you think about automation. But the biggest difference between automation and an AI agent is that automation is a series of if-then rules. Right? It's sort of like one of those machines where you drop the ball at the top and then it knocks over a domino, which then knocks over a broom and then the toaster, and right. It's that's sort of the way to think about automation. Once you've knocked over that first domino, it's going to go through the whole series no matter what. Whereas an AI agent, you can assign something to. So you could say, to make it really tactical, as an example within sales, I could say, okay, I need you to create a list of, like, for example, let's say I'm going to a specific market. I'm headed to Detroit. I'm hosting an event there. While I'm in town, I want to give a free workshop to two different, companies that are in my target company range. An AI agent would be able to check its own output before giving it to you. So it could first go research. It could even come up with, okay, you know, based on just the principles of that is learned from research in that narrow vertical, it could say, okay, what is the ICP? Okay, let's research, which companies from those target customers are in Detroit. And then, okay, and then even what's the culture? Would they be open to free workshops? And it could research multiple different steps on its own without coming back to me for a question every single step. And then it could come back to me and say, okay, these are 5, or maybe 10 people that work for these leading companies that, based on the culture of that company, based on where they're at in terms of, I read all their, recent public, statements around their quarterly earnings and such. These companies seem like they're in a ripe condition to be open to your offering potentially. These are the 5 leads that you can reach out to right now. And so, taking that a step further, you could theoretically have an agent that even reached out to them on one's behalf. But personally, I think that we need to reserve human connection where it matters most. And I think, in this example, that human connection of reaching out would be worth preserving.
And anything you want to add on this?
Well, I'm really looking forward when AI agents hit the consumer market. So, well, I envision a future where we have an agent on our smartphone or our smart device, and that's like a personal assistant, personal agent that can help you to book a restaurant or book a ticket for an airplane or make schedule a meeting with colleagues or send an email to a customer support desk of a large big corporation or the government. And I think when this technology becomes that useful, it will have the biggest impact because everyone will start to use these kind of agents, and these agents will start to make transactions for you as a consumer. And I think that's where the real money will start to show up, because when everyone has an agent that can do all kind of things in your daily life, from purchasing products, negotiating about products or services that you buy on the web, and you have AI agents in marketplaces that negotiate with each other. That's, I think, when it gets really excited.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. If we think about winners and survivors, which companies or regions do you think will emerge as long-term leaders? Will it be OpenAI, Google,
Anthropic or has DeepSeek signalled a shift towards new players? What do you see as shaping the next wave of AI development? Brian?
I think it has to come down to, it will come down to actual application. I think that it's been the last couple of years, it's really been about benchmarking and sort of this combination of like research and, and there's been this, uptick in actual, productization in terms of consumers. But I think that the companies that are going to really, so it's sort of been the generative AI opening, so to speak, and now we're moving into the middle game, to use a chess analogy. And I think that the organizations that can really unlock value for enterprises, combination, there will be, and it might be both, but some, like Christian said, there will be some that, and probably one or two leading organizations that really unlock consumer value. And then the other side will be enterprise agents, the organizations that can develop platforming that can help enterprises actually build AI agents that can orchestrate across an entire value stream, so that in a given moment, when somebody's trying to make a decision, rather than it being prohibitive to go do the research because you'd have to, go call up many different companies to get information, within your value stream of whether or not they could have that, raw material to you by that date. Instead, the AI agents can be, a matter of milliseconds, getting that answer back and interacting with each other, even forming micro negotiations. In terms of geographic, I think that obviously Silicon Valley and Seattle, and there's certain areas in the U.S. that have a high concentration of the people who have really formed most of what we experience on the internet today. But China did create a really great model with DeepSeek, and they're obviously focused on innovation with releasing Manus. And so I think that, it's yet to be seen. I think for the enterprise half of it specifically, I think that it's very likely that one of the leading enterprise players today, like a Microsoft, Amazon, Google, will likely be the one that paves that path. On the consumer side, I do know that if you go to Amazon.com in the US versus in China, it's a completely different user experience.
Christian, anything you want to add?
Well, I believe every technology wave has winners and losers and survivors. In the previous wave, we saw that the disruptors were being disrupted. Apple iTunes was disrupted by a company like Spotify. And today we see the same is basically happening. We see companies which were very good at search and information, like Google. They invented the transformer. They have all the hardware, all the software, all the data, all the people to make AI work, but they're still not the leading company. They're not able to develop at the speed of OpenAI. And I think DeepSeek is another example of that. So I think that we also see all kinds of specializations. Of course, NVIDIA is today the leading company in AI chips, but we see that these chips that they develop are general purpose, so you can run all kind of AI models on it, visual models, language models. But we also see specialized chips now, which are specialized for large language models, which use a tenth of the energy, cost a tenth of the price. So I think the landscape will become more advanced, more complex. And there will be some consolidations, but it's hard to say which company that will be because it's so dynamic.
Brian and Christian, you've both written books which explore the use of AI as a tool to enhance human potential or experiences. I wonder if you could talk to the ethical implications of advancements in AI with regards to us as human beings, and some of the things companies should be aware of when implementing AI within their organizations. Brian?
It's a really important question. One of the core premises of my book, Autonomous Transformation, was that what I found working with, when I was at Microsoft leading AI strategy for the US, what I found while working with Fortune 500 C-level exec teams was that because of my personal value set, I was hopeful that we could find a way to leverage the development of AI to create a more human future. And the irony, and to my delight, what I found was the organizations who were effectively able to unlock any value from AI in the first place had to start with how they led their people in order to even get something through from pilot purgatory into production. And so it actually, it's the cart before the horse to say that, AI and then a more human future. It's, if you want value out of AI, you have to start with treating your people better and orchestrating across experts. And so in terms of the ethical considerations. So that's one, is just there's an economic case to be made that's very sound for how you manage your teams and lead. But then two, I would say I actually created I call it the AI trust equation. There's this amazing book called that had from the early 2000s that had the trust equation that was about trust between people, and it was trust equals credibility plus reliability plus intimacy divided by self-orientation. Is really good, really helpful for me in building trust with people as I grew in my career. And so I decided to attempt to honor them by creating an AI trust equation, which I was delighted when one of them reached out and said, "Hey, good job with that one." I was surprised, but what I came up with, trust in AI equals security plus ethics plus accuracy divided by control. And so I think that as organizations and as people are thinking through these implications, it's very easy for it to become obfuscated. And I think that there's a lot of people who don't know anything about AI who have found that saying, "But I'm really concerned about AI ethics," is a great way to sort of wear a badge of credibility, even if you're not sure what it has to do with anything. But actually thinking through what are our security thresholds of what we're willing to, like, in terms of privacy and security, that we're willing to tolerate as an organization. What about the ethical? And by that I mean not just in terms of how ethical the output would be, but also, do we agree with how it was made, the ethics, and I won't get into the history of that, but for some of them, the way things were made and the way it impacted folks in other countries, is something that organizations have to decide they're okay with.
Thank you, Brian. Christian, anything you'd like to add?
Well, actually, I'm writing the last chapters of my new book, AI, the Human Story, which is basically about this topic. Well, intelligence has always been our USP as mankind. So we are smarter than zebras or penguins, and that's why we have built our society as we know it and did a lot of innovations and stuff. But now we are at a tipping point where AI is taking over on a cognitive level. And that has a lot of applications on the workforce that we have right now. About 78% of our economy is based on hard skills. Hard skills are repetitive tasks that can be defined by rules. Well, if you can define it by rules, you can digitize it, automate it, and in the end, it will become a commodity. So I think we will have to make some difficult decisions in the years to come. A large part of the workforce will be obsolete. What are we going to do with those people? And these are the things that, well, I'm thinking about. And what I believe is that AI forces us to become more human. So, of course, the entire society is built around academics and people that are, well, in their head. And when AI takes over and can do these things and solve problems in a better and more efficient way, what's left of human beings if we lose our cognitive dominance? So that's and I think AI within organizations, management has to deal with that kind of issues. For example, I was at a large private hospital in the Florida, and they say, okay, with the current state of AI, we can reduce 30 to 35% of the time of physicians and doctors and nurses. But the big question is, what are we going to do with those 30, 35%? Are we going to put in more patients to fill up the system even more and more productivity, more efficiency? Or do we allow those doctors and nurses to become 30% more human and be there more for their patients and put a hand on the shoulder when they have it difficult? So these are the questions, I think, which are the hardest one that we have to solve. They're not on a technological level, but more on a moral and ethical level.
As we wrap up this discussion, let me ask you both, what's your top takeaway from this discussion that business leaders should focus on? Christian?
Ooh. Well, the first thing, the most important thing is that there's a lot of talk about AI. A lot of companies talk about AI, but I would suggest to start with AI. Just start to try to play with it, get familiar with it, and move from the fear side of the equation towards the curiosity side. We haven't talked about it a lot, but I think that's where many companies are still talking about it, but not stepping into this space because they are afraid of privacy or whatever kind of downside of AI. But I think it's good for companies to get curious, to play with it and to learn from it and to see what it can do and what it can do not, and then see for themselves what it can do for their industry, for their business.
Brian?
So my top takeaway for organizations and for leaders, I would say, is twofold. One is, I would say that respectfully, I disagree with the idea that AI is even intelligent. It's not intelligent. It's sort of just like saying math. Calculators can do math better than we can, so calculators are smart. But calculators are not smart, and so the same is true with AI. AI is not intelligent, and there's no scientific evidence that we're headed in a direction even of AI truly being intelligent. That's the first thing I'd say. But, just in terms of reducing overall anxiety, maybe for all of us. The second thing I'd say is for organizational leaders, what I would say is actually forget about AI and first start with what is our core value proposition in the market, or within our organization. If you're a team leader, what is it that, from a systems thinking perspective, what is it that our clients or our customers or our partners rely on us to do? And what is it that, where are the areas for improvement? What would be, if we forget about maintaining the current system as it is, and we think instead, what would be the best possible version of what we could create for, the way that we could create that value for those who rely on us? And then work backwards from imagining that value and saying, okay, what would it have to be true for us to actually create that and be delivering that to our our clients and our customers or our partners? And AI may very well, it's very likely to play a role in that. But if you start with AI and then try to figure out use cases, it's like starting a remodel with it, having already selected a hammer and walking around the house with a hammer, trying to figure out how you're going to make your house better. In a remodel, you'd say, well, what do we want first? We want a bigger counter space, or we want a bigger shower. And then you decide what tools you need to achieve that outcome. And AI is the exact same. We need to start first with what value would be the best value you could create as an organization, and then work backwards and determine which tools and which processes and which relationships and networking and other things would be needed for you to actually be able to create that value.
Yeah. Well, that brings us to the end of this episode of Let's Talk Global Business. We'll be back next time with a focus on a new topic. You can find a host of content around AI, as well as listen to the entire catalogue of podcast programming from the Conference Board by visiting our website, conference-board.org. Thank you, Brian and Christian, for sharing your insights with us. I think we could have gone on for way longer, but until next time on Let's Talk Global Business.